Greetings, weary traveler, and welcome to this gentle journey into the heart of the Viking Age. I'm so glad you're here, ready to unwind and drift into the past with me. This tale is crafted to be your soothing companion, whether you're settling down for the night or simply seeking a moment of calm. Before we begin, I'd love to hear where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you. Drop a comment below to share, and let's see how far these stories travel. If you find peace in this immersive storytelling, consider subscribing for more tranquil voyages through history. Now, find a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let your mind wander back over 1,000 years to the rugged shores of Scandinavia. Picture a misty dawn breaking over a Viking village, where longhouses huddle against a windswept cliff. The air is sharp with salt and pine, and the first rays of sunlight glint off the fjord below. Inside the homes, families stir beneath firs, their breath visible in the chill. Smoke begins to rise from hearths as the day's labors beckon. Fishing, farming, forging. This is the Viking world, a place of stark beauty, relentless toil, and unyielding spirit. Let us linger a moment longer in this awakening village. The longhouses stretch like slumbering giants along the shoreline, their timber walls weathered silver by countless seasons of rain and snow. Each dwelling houses not just a family, but an entire community, grandparents sharing wisdom by the fire, children learning their first lessons in weaving and woodwork, and the steady rhythm of daily survival that binds them all together. The thatch roofs, heavy with morning dew, seem to breathe with the life contained within. As the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across the settlement, you might notice the careful order beneath what first appears chaotic. The placement of each building tells a story of social hierarchy and practical necessity. The Jarl's Hall stands proud at the village's heart, its carved dragon heads keeping eternal watch over the community. Around it, the homes of free farmers and craftsmen arrange themselves like loyal retainers, while closer to the water's edge, the workshops of blacksmiths and boat builders echo with the sounds of creation. The harbor itself is a marvel of Viking ingenuity. Sleek longships rest at anchor, their shallow drafts allowing them to beach directly on the stony shore. These vessels, with their graceful curves and dragon prows, represent far more than mere transportation. They are the lifelines connecting this remote village to a vast network of trade, exploration, and cultural exchange that stretches from Greenland to Constantinople. Each ship carries stories of distant shores, exotic goods, and the endless Viking hunger for adventure and opportunity. But let us not be seduced only by tales of far horizons. The true heart of Viking life beats strongest in the everyday moments. The careful tending of crops in the brief growing season, the preservation of food for the long winter months, the intricate craft work that transforms raw materials into objects of both beauty and utility. Watch as a young woman guides her loom with practiced hands, creating cloth that will keep her family warm through the bitter months ahead. Listen to the rhythmic hammering from the smithy, where iron taken from bog ore is transformed into tools, weapons, and household implements that mean the difference between comfort and hardship. The children of this village grow up immersed in a world of stories and practical knowledge. They learn early to read the signs of weather and season, to understand the subtle language of wind and wave that their survival depends upon. Their playground is the rocky shore and dense forest, where they develop the keen senses and quick reflexes that will serve them throughout their lives. They absorb the great tales of gods and heroes not as mere entertainment, but as blueprints for living, lessons about courage, loyalty, cunning, and the complex moral landscape of their world. As evening approaches and the work of the day winds down, the village transforms once again. Cooking fires send savory smoke curling into the twilight sky, carrying the scents of fish stew, roasted meat, and fresh bread. Families gather around their hearths, sharing not just food but the stories that weave them together as a people. The skald, the village storyteller, prepares to earn his place at the high table through the ancient art of verse and tale. Tonight, We'll peel back the myths of horned helmets and fearless warriors to reveal the true Viking life. A life of ruthless hardship, yet remarkable resilience. We'll walk in the footsteps of farmers, mothers, and chieftains, exploring a world where survival demanded strength, cunning, and community. We'll discover how these remarkable people balanced fierce independence with deep loyalty, how they navigated the treacherous waters between pragmatism and honor, and how they built a civilization that would leave its mark on half the world. In the coming hours, you'll meet Astrid, whose skilled hands can coax life from the most barren soil, and Eric, whose knowledge of wind and tide has guided countless voyages to safe harbor. You'll witness the delicate negotiations that maintain peace between rival clans, and the careful rituals that honor both the old gods and the new faith slowly spreading across the northern lands. You'll experience the rhythm of seasons that governed every aspect of Viking existence, from the joyous celebrations of summer's return to the quiet endurance of winter's grip. So, as you sink deeper into your blankets, let the Viking age unfold before you, a tapestry of struggle and splendor that still echoes through time. Close your eyes and feel the salt spray on your face. Hear the creak of timber ships and the whisper of ancient stories carried on the northern wind. Welcome to a world where every sunrise brought both promise and peril, where ordinary people accomplished extraordinary things, and where the human spirit proved as enduring as the stark landscape that forged it. As the sun climbs higher over the fjord, the Viking village hums with activity that speaks of both purpose and desperation. Men haul nets heavy with fish, their hands raw from rope and brine. Calloused palms testament to countless dawns spent wresting sustenance from an unforgiving sea. Women grind barley into coarse flour, their backs aching from hours bent over the quern, the rhythmic scraping of stone against stone marking time in a world where every grain might mean survival. Children scurry between the adults, gathering driftwood, mending nets with tiny fingers, learning that in this harsh land, even the youngest must contribute to the endless struggle. This is the heartbeat of Viking life, a relentless cycle of labor under a sky that offers little mercy. The morning light reveals what the romantic mists of dawn had hidden, the true cost of survival in this uncompromising landscape. Let's step closer to this world and uncover the daily struggles that shaped not just the Vikings' bodies, but their very souls. For it was hardship, more than any saga or raid, that forged the character we remember today. For most Vikings, life was not the saga of daring raids that echo through our modern imagination, but a quieter, more grinding battle against the land itself. The Scandinavian soil was thin and reluctant, barely covering the ancient bedrock that jutted through like the bones of sleeping giants. The growing season stretched only 4 precious months, a brief window between the last killing frost of spring and the first harbinger of winter's return. Farmers toiled with wooden plows and iron-tipped tools to coax barley, oats, and rye from rocky fields that seemed to resist every effort, knowing that a single unexpected frost could transform a year's labor into blackened stalks and spell starvation for an entire household. These farmers were not the adventurous raiders of legend, but men and women bound to the soil by necessity and tradition. Their hands, permanently stained with earth and scarred by thorns, spoke of intimate knowledge of every stone and furrow in their fields. They read the sky like a manuscript of survival, noting the subtle shifts in cloud formation that might herald an early freeze or the precious gift of an extended autumn. Their names are largely lost to history, but their persistence echoes in every Viking settlement that endured through the centuries. The architecture of survival shaped every aspect of daily existence. Winters were brutal marathons of endurance, trapping families in longhouses that were marvels of engineering necessity but trials of human patience. These dark, smoky dwellings housed entire clans in a single cavernous room, where privacy was not merely absent but inconceivable. The central hearth provided both warmth and a cooking fire, its smoke rising through a hole in the roof when the wind allowed. more often swirling through the living space and choking clouds. The stench of sweat, smoke, and livestock, for animals shared these spaces during the harshest months, hung heavy in the air like an oppressive blanket that never lifted. Picture, if you will, a typical winter evening in such a dwelling. 20 or more people crowd around the central fire, their faces illuminated by flickering flames that cast dancing shadows on the soot-blackened walls. Grandmothers tell stories to wide-eyed children, while mothers mend clothes by firelight, their fingers working more by feel than sight. Men carve implements from wood or bone, the soft scraping of knives providing a counterpoint to the whispered tales. Everyone sleeps together on raised platforms covered with furs and rough wool, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air beyond the fire's reach. In such intimacy, tempers could flare as easily as affection, and the skills of diplomacy became as essential as those of farming or fishing. The Viking diet reflected the harsh mathematics of survival in an unforgiving climate. Meals were exercises in making the most of little. Porridge made from whatever grains could be coaxed from the grudging soil, sour cheese called skyr that could be stored through the lean months, and fish or meat when luck and skill allowed. Fresh fruits were precious rarities, appearing briefly during the short summer and then living only in memory through the long, vitamin-starved winter. The consequences of this limited diet carved themselves into Viking bodies and faces. Scurvy gnawed at those who couldn't access enough preserved berries or sprouted grains, leaving them with bleeding gums and weakened bones. Dental decay was a universal plague, with the gritty, stone-ground bread wearing teeth to worn stubs by the time a person reached their 20s. Disease stalked Viking communities like an invisible predator, striking without warning or mercy. Smallpox swept through cramped villages with devastating efficiency, its telltale marks becoming a grim lottery of survival. Tuberculosis thrived in the close quarters of winter dwellings, its persistent cough becoming the soundtrack of seasonal confinement. Parasites, invisible enemies in food and water, weakened bodies already stretched thin by inadequate nutrition. And perhaps most heartbreaking of all, childbirth remained a perilous gamble where women faced the possibility of death with each pregnancy, and infants emerged into a world where survival to their first birthday was never guaranteed. The mathematics of mortality painted a stark picture. The average Viking considered themselves fortunate to celebrate their 40th birthday. This wasn't merely a statistic, but a lived reality that shaped every decision, every relationship, every moment of joy seized from an uncertain existence. Young people married early, not from romance, but from the practical need to produce the next generation quickly. Elderly individuals who survived past 50 were revered not just for their wisdom, but for their sheer biological triumph over the odds. Yet, amidst this catalog of hardship, something extraordinary emerges, the astonishing grit that transformed mere survival into a way of life worth celebrating. Take Thorvald, a farmer from 9th century Denmark, whose story survives etched in weather-worn runestones that stilled at the Scandinavian landscape. The stones tell us he lost 2 young sons to the fever that swept through his village one brutal winter, watching helplessly as their small bodies succumbed to diseases his era couldn't name or treat. His wife, Astrid, died in childbirth attempting to give him another heir, leaving him alone with their surviving daughter and the weight of impossible choices. Rather than succumb to despair, Thorvald channeled his grief into determination. He tilled his frost-resistant fields with methodical precision, learning to read subtle changes in soil and weather that might coax just a few more bushels from his land. When farming alone couldn't sustain his household, he joined trading expeditions, sailing treacherous waters to exchange furs and amber for grain and tools. His weathered hands learned to navigate not just by stars and currents, but by the subtle signs of profitable markets and trustworthy trading partners. Thorvald's story, preserved in stone and memory, represents thousands of similar tales. Quiet heroism born not from battlefield glory, but from the daily decision to continue despite loss, to plant crops despite uncertainty, to love despite the constant presence of death. His life, like so many others, became a testament to endurance that was more profound than any warrior's saga, a persistent flame of human will burning steadily against the wind of circumstance. As you let these images of hardship and resilience settle in your mind, feel the weight of their days, the aching muscles worked beyond exhaustion, the gnawing uncertainty of winter's approach, the grief of losses that couldn't be prevented. But feel, too, their strength carrying you gently toward rest, their example of finding meaning and even moments of joy within lives that demanded everything and promised nothing except the chance to try again tomorrow. Imagine a Viking longhouse at dusk, its hearth fire casting dancing shadows on woven tapestries that tell stories older than memory. The flames illuminate faces arranged not by chance, but by ancient custom. Chieftains nearest the warmth, their silver arm rings catching the light, while servants move quietly in the shadows beyond. Here, in this carefully orchestrated gathering, the invisible threads of Viking society become visible, each person's place determined by birth, achievement, and the complex web of obligations that bound their world together. The roles of men and women were as rigid as the oak beams holding up the roof above them. Yet within these constraints lay infinite variations of human experience. Viking society was indeed a web of hierarchies. Chieftains, freemen, thralls, where status and gender dictated one's path from cradle to grave, but also where exceptional individuals could occasionally transcend these boundaries through courage, cunning, or sheer force of will. Let's explore this intricate world, where honor was the currency of respect, but not all were free to earn it equally. As we settle deeper into this exploration, notice how the very architecture of the longhouse reflects the social order within. The high seat, carved with protective runes and mythical beasts, stands elevated at the hall's center, not merely furniture, but a throne that transforms whoever occupies it. From this position, the chieftain can observe all who enter, judge disputes, and demonstrate the wealth that justifies his authority. The walls themselves speak of hierarchy, decorated with the finest tapestries depicting heroic deeds, while weapons hang in places of honor, their polished surfaces reflecting not just firelight, but the martial values that underpinned Viking culture. Men held the reins of political and economic power with an iron grip forged by tradition and necessity. They were warriors when conflict demanded, traders when opportunity called, and farmers when the seasons required. Their worth measured not just by physical strength, but by the more complex currency of honor and reputation. A man's honor was his most precious possession, more valuable than silver or land, for it determined his standing in the community and his family's future prospects. Consider Bjorn, a young freeman whose story embodies both the opportunities and perils of masculine identity in Viking society. Born to a respected farmer, Bjorn inherited not just land but expectations, the weight of ancestral honor that demanded he prove himself worthy of his lineage. His nights were filled with dreams of glory on a raid, of returning home with silver and stories that would elevate his status among his peers. He practiced with axe and shield until his hands bled, learning not just the mechanics of combat, but the elaborate codes that governed when violence was honorable and when it was merely brutish. But even for men like Bjorn, life was a constant navigation of treacherous social currents. Feuds between clans could erupt over seemingly trivial matters: a stolen cow, an imagined slight, a disputed boundary stone. Yet these conflicts carried the weight of generations. Honor, once questioned, demanded satisfaction, and satisfaction often required blood. Bjorn's own saga, carved into a memorial stone that still stands in Denmark, tells of a duel fought to avenge his father's name after a rival claimed the older man had cheated in a land transaction. The combat left Bjorn scarred but respected, his victory restoring his family's reputation at the cost of permanent injury and a blood feud that would haunt his descendants. The masculine world of Viking society was thus a double-edged sword, offering pathways to glory and influence, while demanding a constant readiness to risk everything for abstract concepts of honor. Young men learned early that their physical courage would be tested repeatedly, not just in battle, but in the countless smaller confrontations that determined social standing. They developed elaborate rituals around drinking, boasting, and gift-giving that served as peaceful outlets for competitive instincts while reinforcing the hierarchies that kept society functioning. For women, the Viking world presented a different, but no less complex set of constraints and opportunities. Their primary domain was indeed the longhouse, but this space held more power and responsibility than modern perspectives might suggest. Here, women like Ingrid, a weaver's daughter, wielded authority over household economics, food production, and the intricate networks of kinship and alliance that often determined a family's survival. The longhouse was not merely a prison but a kingdom, albeit one with carefully defined borders. Ingrid's daily life involved far more than the domestic tasks that occupied her hands. As she wove wool into cloth, she was creating not just clothing but valuable trade goods that could be exchanged for exotic items from distant lands. Her knowledge of herbs and healing made her a crucial figure during times of illness, when her skills might mean the difference between life and death for community members. The butter she churned and the bread she baked were not merely sustenance, but symbols of prosperity and hospitality that reflected on her family's status. Yet the constraints on women's autonomy were undeniable and often heartbreaking. Marriages were typically arranged to forge political and economic alliances between families, leaving young women like Ingrid with little voice in choosing their life partners. Her value was measured largely by her potential to produce male heirs and manage household affairs efficiently. The transition from daughter to wife often meant leaving behind everything familiar, family, friends, even the landscape of childhood, to become part of a new clan structure where she would need to prove herself all over again. Despite these limitations, some women managed to carve out spaces of agency and even defiance within the rigid social structure. Consider Freydis Eriksdotter, Leif Erikson's formidable sister, whose story has echoed through the centuries precisely because it violated so many expectations. According to the sagas, when her expedition to Vinland faced attack, Freydis seized an axe and rallied the defenders, her courage shaming men who had begun to flee. But her story also reveals the complex relationship between exceptional women and society's expectations. She was praised for her bravery, yet condemned for her later ruthlessness, celebrated as a hero yet remembered as someone who overstepped proper feminine bounds. Women like Freydis existed at the margins of acceptability, their stories whispered with a mixture of admiration and unease. They served as both inspirations and warnings, proof that gender roles could be transcended, but only at great cost. Most women found subtler ways to exercise influence, through the management of household wealth, the arrangement of marriages for their children, and the preservation of family histories and reputations through storytelling and memory. The world of the vulva, the female seer and practitioner of cedar magic, offered another pathway for women to claim authority outside conventional domestic roles. These figures commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Their supposed ability to see the future and communicate with the spirit world, granting them influence that transcended normal gender hierarchies. Yet even this power came with isolation and suspicion, marking them as figures apart from ordinary society. At the bottom of this complex social pyramid labored the thralls, the enslaved men and women whose presence was so fundamental to Viking society that it's impossible to understand the culture without acknowledging their suffering. These individuals, captured in raids or born into bondage, bore the heaviest physical burdens while remaining largely invisible in the historical record. They worked the fields that fed the free population, served in the households that showcased their masters' wealth, and provided the labor that allowed Viking society to function. Yet even within the dehumanizing system of slavery, individuals found ways to maintain dignity and identity. Archaeological evidence suggests that thralls created small personal items, carved wooden combs, simple jewelry, protective amulets, that served as assertions of selfhood in a world that denied their humanity. Some earned manumission through loyal service or exceptional skills, while others formed underground networks of mutual support that helped them endure their circumstances. The stories of thralls like Olaf, mentioned briefly in a family saga, reveal glimpses of lives lived in the shadows of recorded history. Olaf, captured as a child during a raid on Ireland, spent decades serving a Norwegian chieftain before earning his freedom through his skills as a metalworker. His story, preserved only because his descendants achieved prominence, hints at countless other tales of resilience and adaptation that have been lost to time. As evening deepens around our imagined longhouse, the social hierarchies become more pronounced. The chieftain and his closest companions claim the warmest spots near the fire, their conversation turning to matters of law, trade, and politics that will shape the community's future. The women of the household move efficiently through their domains, ensuring that guests are fed and comfortable while managing the complex logistics of hospitality. In the outer rings of light, servants and thralls attend to the endless tasks that sustain this carefully ordered world. As you drift deeper into this exploration of Viking society, picture these interwoven lives, bound by duty and tradition, yet flickering with individual desires and defiance. Feel the weight of expectations that shaped every choice, the courage required to challenge established norms, and the quiet resilience that allowed people to find meaning within even the most restrictive circumstances. Let their complex humanity, with all its contradictions and struggles, cradle you into a deeper understanding of what it meant to be human in a world so different from our own, yet connected to us by the eternal threads of ambition, love, and the persistent hope for something better. As night falls over the Viking village, the glow of a sacred grove flickers in the distance like a beacon calling to ancestral memory, where offerings are made to Odin the All-Father and Thor the Thunder-Wielder. The ancient trees stand sentinel over rituals that have echoed through countless generations, their gnarled branches reaching toward stars that have witnessed the same prayers, the same hopes, the same desperate bargains with fate. But even as these timeless ceremonies unfold, a new faith is stirring, carried on the winds of trade and conquest, slipping into Viking consciousness as quietly as morning mist across the fjords. The Viking Age was indeed a time of profound spiritual upheaval, as pagan traditions that had sustained northern peoples through centuries of hardship found themselves challenged by the revolutionary promise of Christianity. This was not merely a change of religious preference, but a fundamental reimagining of humanity's relationship with the divine, with mortality, and with the very purpose of existence. Let's journey into this transformation, where belief shaped not just individual destiny, but the future of entire civilizations. The sacred grove where our village gathers represents more than a place of worship. It embodies a complete worldview that had evolved over millennia to match the harsh realities of Scandinavian life. Here, beneath trees considered older and wiser than any human memory, the Norse gods ruled Viking hearts with a fierce intimacy that modern minds struggle to comprehend. These were not distant, abstract deities but cosmic forces as real and immediate as the wind that filled their sails or the frost that threatened their crops. Odin, the one-eyed seeker of wisdom, embodied the Viking understanding that knowledge came at a terrible price. His sacrifice of his eye for a drink from the well of wisdom resonated with people who knew that every advantage in their unforgiving world demanded sacrifice. Warriors who hung themselves from trees in ritual reenactment of Odin's 9-day ordeal on Yggdrasil were not engaging in mere symbolism, but participating in a cosmic drama that gave meaning to their suffering. In the flickering firelight of the sacred grove, shamans would enter trances that allowed them to walk the 9 worlds, seeking guidance for decisions that could mean life or death for entire communities. Thor, the red-bearded thunderer, represented the more immediate concerns of survival and protection. His mighty hammer Mjolnir was not just a weapon but a tool of blessing, used to consecrate marriages, harvests, and newborn children. When storms raged across the North Sea, threatening to dash Viking ships against rocky shores, sailors would touch the small hammer amulets they wore and know that Thor was fighting the giants of chaos on their behalf. His protection extended from the cosmic to the mundane, from battles with the world serpent to the blessing of ale that might ward off disease. The promise of Valhalla offered a glorious afterlife specifically tailored to warrior culture, where those who died bravely in battle would feast and fight for eternity, preparing for the final confrontation at Ragnarok. This was not heaven as later Christianity would conceive it, but a warrior's paradise that reflected Viking values while acknowledging the brutal reality of their world. The concept gave meaning to death in combat and provided psychological armor against the fear that might otherwise paralyze a warrior in the crucial moment of battle. The rituals that bound communities to these deities were elaborate affairs that engaged all the senses and emotions. Animal sacrifices, horses, cattle, sometimes dogs, were not acts of primitive barbarism, but complex ceremonies that affirmed the community's relationship with the divine while providing practical benefits. The meat fed the assembled worshippers, the blood consecrated sacred spaces, and the ritualized killing demonstrated humanity's power over life and death while acknowledging the god's ultimate authority. In times of extreme crisis, when plague, famine, or invasion threatened the survival of the community, more dramatic sacrifices might be contemplated, acts that horrified later Christian chroniclers but reflected the desperate faith of people who believed the gods demanded ultimate commitment. But as Vikings sailed beyond their traditional horizons, their longships cutting through waters that led to Christian lands, they encountered a radically different vision of the divine. In the monasteries of Ireland and England, the trading posts of the Frankish kingdoms, and the great cities of Byzantium, they met followers of a god who promised not glorious death, but eternal life, not cosmic struggle, but ultimate peace, not harsh justice, but infinite mercy. This new faith challenged every assumption of the Viking worldview. Where Norse religion saw the universe as locked in eternal conflict, destined to end in mutual destruction at Ragnarok, Christianity proclaimed a cosmos moving toward redemption and resurrection. Where the old gods demanded sacrifice and offered no guarantees beyond honorable death, the Christian God had already made the ultimate sacrifice and promised salvation to all who accepted it. The contrast was not merely theological, but psychological, offering hope where Viking tradition had counseled heroic resignation. The appeal was not immediately obvious to a warrior culture. A religion that praised meekness and turning the other cheek seemed antithetical to Viking values of strength and honor. Yet Christianity offered something the old faith could not: the promise that suffering had ultimate meaning, that death was not the end, and that even the humblest person could achieve a form of immortality previously reserved for heroes. For thralls who would never see Valhalla, for women whose deaths in childbirth earned no songs, for farmers who died of disease rather than sword stroke, Christianity offered dignity and hope. Enter Harald Bluetooth, King of Denmark in the late 10th century, whose personal journey from paganism to Christianity illuminates the complex dynamics of religious conversion in the Viking world. Harald's saga tells not just of individual transformation, but of the intricate political calculations that shaped spiritual change. His baptism, which took place around 960 CE, was spurred partly by genuine conviction, but equally by the practical recognition that trade ties with Christian Europe required diplomatic accommodation with the dominant faith of his southern neighbors. The famous Jelling Stone, which Harald raised to commemorate his parents and proclaim Denmark's conversion, stands as one of history's most powerful symbols of religious transition. Its runes blend pagan serpents with a Christian cross in an artistic synthesis that reflects the cultural fusion taking place in Viking minds. The inscription, "Harald who won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian," reveals both the king's pride in his political achievements and his understanding that religious conversion was itself a form of conquest, not just of territory, but of hearts and minds. Yet Harold's declaration of Christian faith for his kingdom met with resistance that ran deeper than mere political opposition. Many of his people clung to Thor's hammer with the desperation of those who feared losing not just their religion, but their very identity. The old faith was woven into every aspect of Viking culture: their laws, their art, their understanding of courage and honor. To abandon it felt like betraying the ancestors whose spirits still walked among the living, whose protection still shielded the community from cosmic chaos. Harold's rule became a delicate balancing act between diplomatic necessity and cultural preservation. He built churches to demonstrate his Christian commitment, while carefully sparing many sacred groves to ease his people's spiritual transition. His court became a fascinating laboratory of religious synthesis, where Christian priests debated theology with pagan skalds who reinterpreted old myths in light of new understanding. Some Vikings found ways to honor both Christ and Thor, wearing cross pendants alongside hammer amulets, seeing no contradiction in seeking protection from all available divine sources. This religious flexibility reflected a pragmatic approach to spirituality that characterized much of the conversion period. Vikings had always been willing to honor foreign gods when traveling in foreign lands. It seemed only sensible to ensure divine protection wherever one might be. Adding Christ to their pantheon initially seemed less threatening than replacing their traditional deities entirely. Only gradually did they come to understand that Christianity demanded exclusive loyalty in ways that the old polytheistic system had not. The transition was far from smooth or uniform across Viking territories. Pagan chieftains in remote areas defied Christian kings, maintaining traditional practices for generations after official conversion. In Iceland, the Althing's decision in 1000 CE to adopt Christianity was reached through political compromise rather than spiritual conviction, with private pagan worship still permitted. Villages throughout Scandinavia whispered of old rituals performed in secret, while Christian churches were built on sites previously sacred to Thor or Odin, creating spaces where new and old spiritual energies seemed to blend. Archaeological evidence reveals the complexity of this transition. Graves from the conversion period contain fascinating mixtures of pagan and Christian symbolism. Thor's hammers buried alongside crosses, traditional grave goods placed with bodies oriented toward Christian east rather than pagan north. These material remains suggest that many Vikings navigated the religious transformation by creating personal syntheses that honored both traditions while gradually shifting toward the new faith. By the 11th century, Christianity had indeed taken root throughout most of Scandinavia, but it was a Christianity that bore the distinctive marks of its Viking adoption. The new faith reshaped laws and loyalties, introducing concepts of universal brotherhood that transcended clan boundaries while maintaining the warrior values that defined Viking identity. Christ became a cosmic warrior defeating Satan much as Thor had battled the giants, and Christian saints took on characteristics of pagan heroes. The Viking spirit, once fueled by the fatalistic acceptance that all things must end at Ragnarok, now sought the eternal salvation promised by the cross. Yet something was also lost in this transformation. The intimate relationship with nature that characterized Norse religion, the sense that spirits dwelt in every grove and stream, gave way to a more hierarchical cosmology centered on distant heaven. The acceptance of mortality that had given Viking culture its particular intensity was replaced by hope for eternal life, changing the very character of heroism from defiant courage in the face of certain doom to faithful service in expectation of divine reward. As you let these tales of spiritual transformation wash over you, feel the profound tension of a world caught between ancient wisdom and revolutionary hope. Picture the flickering flames in the sacred grove growing dimmer as church bells begin to ring across the landscape, marking not the end of one faith, but the complex birth of something entirely new. Sense the prayers rising from both altar and ancient tree, carrying the hopes of people trying to navigate between the gods of their ancestors and the God of their future. Let their spiritual struggle, with all its uncertainty and longing, guide you gently toward your own peaceful rest, cradled by the understanding that transformation, however difficult, is part of the eternal human journey toward meaning and transcendence. As the embers of the hearth fade to glowing memories and the Viking village slips into the gentle embrace of shadow, our journey through this brutal yet vibrant world draws to a contemplative close. The flames that once illuminated the faces of Thorvald, Ingrid, Bjorn, and countless others now exist only in the warm glow of our imagination. Yet their stories continue to burn with a light that has refused to dim across the centuries. The Vikings were not just the warriors of legend that populate our modern fantasies, but people. Farmers who read the sky like scripture, mothers who sang lullabies that carried the weight of winter's approach, dreamers who saw new lands beyond every horizon, who faced a merciless world with the kind of unyielding spirit that transforms ordinary human existence into something approaching the heroic. Let's pause in this moment of transition, as darkness settles over our imagined longhouse, to reflect on their enduring legacy, a beacon that has guided countless generations across the centuries, illuminating paths through our own modern wilderness of uncertainty and change. For in understanding what the Vikings have left us, we discover not just history, but wisdom that speaks directly to our contemporary souls. The Viking Age, spanning roughly from the late 8th to the 11th centuries, was indeed a crucible of hardship that forged a people of extraordinary resilience and creativity. From the icy fields of Norway where summer lasted barely 4 months, to the storm-lashed seas that claimed so many of their wooden ships, Vikings battled not just human enemies, but the fundamental hostility of nature itself. They lived in a world where disease struck without warning, where famine could follow a single failed harvest, where the thin line between survival and extinction required constant vigilance and uncompromising determination. Yet from this grinding struggle against seemingly impossible odds, they built a culture of stunning artistic achievement that continues to take our breath away. Their intricate runestones, carved with serpentine designs that seem to writhe with life even in death, tell stories that blend history with mythology in ways that reveal deep truths about the human condition. These monuments, scattered across Scandinavia like ancient prayers made stone, speak not just of individual lives, but of a collective understanding that memory must be preserved, that stories matter, that human experience deserves to be remembered and honored. Their dragon-proud ships, perhaps the most iconic symbols of Viking achievement, represent far more than mere transportation. These vessels, with their shallow drafts and flexible construction, were marvels of engineering that could navigate both open ocean and shallow rivers with equal grace. But more than that, they embodied the Viking spirit itself, the willingness to venture into the unknown, to risk everything for the possibility of something better, to trust in craftsmanship and courage when facing the vast uncertainty of uncharted waters. The geographical scope of Viking exploration and influence staggers the modern imagination. Their longships carried them from the windswept shores of Newfoundland, where Leif Erikson's settlements preceded Columbus by 5 centuries, to the golden markets of Constantinople, where their warriors served as the Byzantine emperor's elite guard. They established trading posts along the rivers of Russia, founded cities that would become Dublin and York, and left their linguistic fingerprints on languages from English to Russian. In Iceland, they created one of the world's first parliamentary systems, while in Normandy, their descendants would reshape the political landscape of medieval Europe. Yet perhaps their most remarkable achievement was literary, the sagas that preserve their stories in verse and prose that still captivates readers nearly a millennium later. These tales, passed down through generations of storytellers before being committed to parchment, represent one of the world's great literary traditions. They whisper to us across the centuries of courage that transcends mere physical bravery, of losses that echo through generations, of the complex moral landscape that real people navigate when faced with impossible choices. The sagas reveal Vikings as fully realized human beings rather than the cartoon warriors of popular imagination. In their pages, we meet heroes who struggle with doubt, who make mistakes with devastating consequences, who find love in unexpected places and lose it to forces beyond their control. We see the tender relationship between Egil Skallagrimson and his daughter, the complex loyalties that bind and sometimes destroy families, the way individual choices ripple outward to shape the fate of entire communities. But the world that created these remarkable people was itself destined for transformation. As we explored in our journey through their spiritual evolution, Christianity gradually tamed what later chroniclers would call their pagan fire, replacing the fatalistic worldview that had shaped their culture with new hopes and different fears. The clan-based society that had sustained them through centuries of hardship gave way to larger kingdoms that could command resources and loyalty on an unprecedented scale. Figures like Harold Bluetooth, whose conversion to Christianity we witnessed, became bridges between old and new ways of understanding the world and humanity's place within it. His famous gelling stone stands not just as a monument to religious transformation, but as evidence of the Vikings' remarkable ability to adapt without entirely losing their essential character. Similarly, women like Freydis Eriksdotter, whose courage in Vinland defied conventional gender expectations, embodied the way individual Vikings could transcend the limitations of their time while remaining recognizably products of their culture. These transitional figures wove a tapestry of adaptation that demonstrates one of the Vikings' most important legacies: their pragmatic flexibility in the face of changing circumstances. They were not rigid traditionalists clinging to outdated customs, but creative problem solvers who could incorporate new ideas without sacrificing their core identity. This adaptability allowed Viking culture to survive its own transformation, evolving into the medieval Scandinavian kingdoms that would continue to play important roles in European history. The true Viking legacy, then, is not the Hollywood vision of berserkers and raiders, but something far more valuable and enduring: their demonstration of how human resilience can flourish even under the most challenging circumstances. They showed us how to wrest meaning from a world of scarcity and strife, how to find beauty in small moments of connection and creativity, how to maintain hope without illusion and courage without recklessness. Their approach to storytelling alone offers profound lessons for our modern world. In an age where narratives are often simplified into binary conflicts between good and evil, the sagas present complex moral landscapes where heroes have flaws and villains have motivations, where choices carry unintended consequences, and where wisdom often comes through suffering. They remind us that truth is usually more complicated and more interesting than the stories we tell ourselves for comfort. The Viking understanding of honor, properly interpreted, speaks to contemporary concerns about integrity and authenticity. Their concept of honor was not about maintaining appearances or following rules, but about being true to one's commitments even when that truth demanded sacrifice. In our age of shifting loyalties and convenient ethics, their insistence that reputation mattered more than wealth offers a counterweight to purely materialistic values. Their relationship with nature, though often harsh and exploitative by modern standards, contained elements of respect and integration that contemporary environmentalism might learn from. They understood themselves as part of natural cycles rather than masters of them, and their survival depended on reading natural signs with an accuracy that few modern people can match. Climate change and environmental degradation might benefit from some measure of their intimate knowledge of natural systems and their consequences. As you nestle deeper into your covers, allowing the warmth to chase away the chill of distant fjords and ancient winters, consider what their lives teach us about navigating our own uncertain times. In our modern world, where challenges may be different but no less daunting: economic uncertainty, environmental crisis, social division, their struggles remind us to face difficulties with both grit and grace, to find beauty and meaning in small moments of human connection rather than waiting for grand gestures or perfect solutions. Think of the Viking mother singing to her child during the long winter night, investing that moment with all the love and hope that might carry both of them through to spring. Consider the farmer like Thorvald, who planted crops knowing that frost or drought might destroy them, but planting nonetheless because the alternative was certain starvation. Remember the craftsperson whose hands shaped beauty from raw materials not because anyone demanded it, but because the human spirit requires beauty to thrive. The Vikings lived fiercely, knowing life was fleeting and precious precisely because it was fragile. They understood that meaning must be created rather than discovered, that courage is not the absence of fear but action in spite of it, that community is not a luxury but a necessity for human flourishing. Their legacy challenges us to meet our own trials with similar determination, to build something worthwhile from whatever materials we have available, to leave stories worth telling to those who come after us. In our age of global connection and instant communication, we might learn from their understanding that true wealth lies not in accumulation, but in relationships, the bonds between family members, the loyalty between friends, the mutual obligations that create communities capable of surviving hardship together. Their emphasis on reputation and legacy reminds us that we are not isolated individuals, but links in a chain of human experience that stretches backward to our ancestors and forward to generations yet unborn. Good night, dear traveler, and thank you for joining me in this Viking saga that has carried us from the harsh realities of daily survival to the soaring heights of human imagination and endurance. As you prepare for sleep, let your mind drift like a longship finding safe harbor after a long voyage, carrying treasures both practical and spiritual from distant shores. May your dreams carry the echo of their longships sailing into the mists of time, their dragon prows cutting through waters that connect all times and all places where humans have dared to venture beyond the familiar in search of something better. May you wake to a world of possibility, carrying with you the Vikings' greatest gift, the knowledge that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they face their challenges with courage, creativity, and the support of those who share their journey. Sleep well, and let history's lessons guide you forward into whatever adventures await. The Vikings' story continues in each of us who chooses resilience over despair, community over isolation, meaning over emptiness. Their legacy lives not in museums or history books, but in every act of courage that helps create a world worthy of the struggles it demands. Rest now, knowing that you are part of this continuing story, and that tomorrow offers new opportunities to write chapters worthy of remembrance. The hearth fire may have faded, but its warmth remains, carried forward in the eternal human capacity to find light in darkness and hope in the most challenging circumstances.